It's 25 minutes past 7 and there's a podcast out at the moment all about the town of East Grinstead.
As you approach East Grinstead on the B2110, hemmed in on all sides by verdant foliage that forms a leafy tunnel into the town, the first thing you might notice, other than an adjustment to the speed limit to a mere 40-mile-per-hour canter, is a brown sign that says St Hill Manor. Below that, you'd see the National Trust symbol next to the word Standard. That's Philip Webb's Arts and Crafts House, now open to the public, which Niklaus Pevsner describes as wonderfully relaxed. And you'd be forgiven for assuming that St Hill Manor is in much the same vein. A Sussex stately home where you can probably take cream tea on the lawn before picking up an overpriced postcard for Granny. Except that's not what St Hill is. St Hill is a sacred site. St Hill is where they experimented to find out if tomatoes have feelings. St Hill was the home of a religion's prophet. St Hill is one of the world's premier finishing schools for fundamentalists. For Britain, and for East Grinstead, St Hill is the home of Scientology. This is the town that didn't stare. I'm Nick Hilton.
Oh, it does sound interesting, doesn't it? Well, we can speak now to Nick Hilton, who is the host and the voice that you just heard there. Morning to you, Nick. So the town that didn't stare. What's wrong with East Grinstead?
Well, there's nothing wrong with East Grinstead. Certainly, I think that they would argue that there's something right with East Grinstead that makes it so amenable to, all these alternative religions, but also the kind of the town that didn't stare moniker came from these medical practices in the Second World War, which, had an amazing social impact on burns victims. So I don't think there's anything wrong with East Grinstead. It's just a slightly unusual place.
And what makes it so unusual?
Well, I think just fundamentally people are intrigued by the fact that Scientology, which is a very, splashy, international, famous kind of religion, cult, there's a lot of debate on those terms, that it has this major base there in this town, which is, to all intents and purposes, a very kind of, conventional middle-class town in southern England. So that's kind of a big thing. But then the fact that there are also the Mormon temple is there, Opus Dei, famous from the Da Vinci Code, are there. It makes people think, why is this kind of clustering happening? And, I think that's naturally intriguing, even if there isn't a particularly definite answer.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to point out, Nick, you did grow up in the town. So has your perception of it changed since speaking to various people for the podcast?
I think probably it has a little bit, although my perception growing up was probably the same as most people's perception in the town, which is that they're not that bothered by the present, certainly in the modern period of these religions. In fact, there's this, when Scientology first moved in there in the 50s and the 60s, there was a big kind of effort to woo the town and to convert people there. And that sort of dried up. I think there's an acceptance now that East Grinstead is not going to become some sort of hotbed of active Scientology. So the relationship between the town and the Scientologists and the Mormons and Opus Dei is very much at a kind of arm's length. And so I think a lot of people in the town probably don't even know about these things, or they've heard about it, but it doesn't impact on their life at all. So it's actually when East Grinstead is focused on by people like myself, but also by, occasionally tabloid newspapers will do a sort of splashy page on East Grinstead. That's when people in the town actually find out about their own town, which is a kind of weird sensation of not really knowing the place that you live, or perhaps they do know it, and, my approach is the wrong one.
Well, you created the podcast in your bedroom, didn't you, during lockdown? So what was that experience like?
Yeah, it was quite nice. I needed a little project to take my mind off things, and suddenly I had all this time and access to a really huge range of kind of guests that I would otherwise have struggled to get, who just suddenly had time. And I've been thinking about it for years and writing about it for some time for magazines and places, and it just seems like it was an appropriate time. I happened to make podcasts for a living, so I had all the equipment ready, and we just went for it.
Perfect sort of sequence of events, really, in terms of timing then. So the town that didn't stare, where can we hear it?
You can find it anywhere that you listen to your podcast, so Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, anywhere. Just Google The Town That Didn't Stare podcast and you will find it.
Perfect. Thank you ever so much for speaking to us this morning. Most appreciated. Nick Hilton there, host of The Town That Didn't Stare. If you are from East Grinstead, get in touch this morning. What makes it so special? What makes it so peculiar? 0800 587 1046. It's 7:30.